No, really appreciate you making time for this, Daniel. Before we kick things off, would you mind giving me a little bit of context to your professional journey, especially over the past couple of years?
Sure. My name's Daniel Tibble. I've worked in automotive data for over 6 years now, nearly seven, which is as long as anyone really, I guess. So currently I'm working for Renault Mobilize, which is a part of Renault that focuses on sustainable new mobility and new types of revenue streams in the automotive business. You know, as people's habits and behaviors change, the old way of doing business needs to continually evolve, and that's what Mobilize is very much set up to do. Before that, I worked for a company called Wejo, who were, when I joined, was a startup in Manchester. There was 40 of us in a WeWork office in St. Peter's Square. I was with them for 4 years, a fantastic company to work for. We went public in 2022 with a €1 billion valuation, which was an amazing achievement and really was, being in a company that was growing and scaling at that speed, such a great place to work and to be involved with. Long story short, the company got into difficulties. There was heavy impact from COVID and the post-COVID macroeconomic factors. The company went into administration, but the learnings and the path that we were driving within the automotive data industry, we're continuing to see some of the benefits from that. We really were the leaders in that space. Before that, I've worked in data for my whole career since we used to call it management information. Then we started calling it business intelligence, data science, and so on and so forth. I worked as head of analytics at the Christie Hospital in Manchester. And I also spent quite a bit of time as working with Booking.com, setting up data products and data science platforms and things within that organization. Fantastic culture, Booking.com, really data driven, really understood how data science and models and centralized AI could transform business and a consumer offer.
No,
Great to
super.
be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
No, yeah, me too. Super interesting journey. Before we talk much more about Mobilize and your current role, it would be super interesting to learn a little bit more about, and I'm probably butchering the name, Vejo and the role you played there, especially during the pandemic. So what specifically did Vejo offer, and what role did you play in their success?
Yep. So it's Wejo for We
Vejo,
Journey.
sorry, yeah.
Yep. It's okay. It's a difficult one to see and pronounce. So Wejo, we specialized in connected vehicle data. We were one of, if not the first, to do that, and we were certainly the first to do it at scale. So we took data from original equipment manufacturers, so OEMs, the people who make the cars, and we centralized it, we processed it, we normalized it, we built models off it, and then we created value data products in the traffic industry. We did a bit of work with retail analytics. We were the first to do it at scale. We were processing 18 billion data points a day, and most of that was a sub-minute latency. We took multiple brands across America and Europe, and we were really at the forefront of this fantastic new data set, looking at movement data, looking at braking events, working in safety use cases, working with fleet companies. And yeah, like I say, it was a fantastic journey. I joined before we signed our first commercial deal. By the end, we were turning over many millions a quarter of revenue over the 4 years. My specific role, I started off within business intelligence, but very quickly moved to start building analytics on top of our data. So that was looking at anything from what were the changes in traffic flow if there was roadworks on a specific interstate in America, to looking at predictive models to understand when drivers were driving at their safest, and if there was a way to predict that there was going to be a autonomous braking event or another type of safety event in the road. And we did start looking at ADAS and other automated driving use cases as well. Really, we were looking at all the different use cases that you could do with this brand new data vehicle or data asset.
It was super interesting. You mentioned one phrase there, if I'm not mistaken, capturing value from data, which is something that I think any organization and any probably person working in data struggles with. I mean, we know that data is, whichever analogy we want to use, the lifeblood of many of these, or of all AI products, or the foundation. And I was just wondering, how did you approach the value conversations? How did you articulate the value of your data products, and how did you sell the products and services that you offer to these mobility service companies, the OEMs? How did you approach this conversation?
It was and is the most difficult part of building data products, right? I mean, data products, because of where they sit in the value chain, very rarely within themselves is how you realize the value. But whether it's, the new data that we're working with, or, even 20 years ago, it's still all around what is that use case? What is that business decision or commercial decision or change that you want to make? And how can you use data to better optimize that? There's always a challenge with data products, whether it's building a data warehouse or a data lake or AI, that you don't know what the value is until you built it, because it's not the sort of value that you can easily predict how successful the model will be. So that's always a paradox that you've got to deal with when you're trying to build data business cases and justify the investment. How we did it in Wejo, interestingly, a lot of it came out of COVID, because that was when we first started making the insights that we were able to produce seem tangible. Within COVID, like with a lot of companies, it was very, very challenging. We sold traffic data, and then all of a sudden there was no traffic. So we started looking at, well, actually, what can we see through the data? We started looking at mobility trends and where people were moving, where people had stopped moving, particularly across the United States. What was the impact of different orders of stay at home or reduced travel and things on people's mobility? Because we could see it on a really, really granular level in America. People had stopped going to work, people had stopped doing leisure. So by making it tangible, really focusing on that tangible element, we actually got approached by a Department of Transport in America from a LinkedIn post. We were putting out a lot of content at the time, and they noticed one of our LinkedIn posts that showed the change. I believe it was a change in people's behaviors pre, during, and post an announcement, and how people had started changing whether they were going to retail or leisure activities. And they approached us directly and said, look, we need this, if not every month, every week for our governor, because they want to see what the changes in these patterns are, because they want to see where people are driving from and to, and being able to use that in a decision making. And within 4 weeks, we'd entered into a commercial contract with them. And it was one of our first examples of selling not just data, but actually selling insight, because we tied it into that ultimate decision making, that at a very high level, we look at many, many pieces of data and evidence and start making decisions around the efficacy or not of lockdowns and COVID trends. So that's just one example, but really for me, it always goes down to work with the decision maker, whether it's a traffic company, whether it's a sales leader, or whether it's finance or someone in planning. Work directly with them, understand what their decision is, and then use your expertise to translate that into a piece of data or insight they can then use to better inform that decision.
No, makes a lot of sense, and it's probably also, I mean, I currently sit within an internal team where we can have, I guess, also sort of very open and honest conversations around what are our initial assumptions, which one of those may change moving forward, and then what are the areas where we sort of need a leap of faith and sort of trust that it's the right thing, and hope that we, as you said, as we explore the data and possible use case and get a better understanding of the actual metrics that we're able to impact to a certain extent, and then focus on those. But it's this sort of element of uncertainty that I think some traditional stakeholders are not super used to.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the metrics is very, very important, because as you go along the journey, you need to measure that improvement. The difficulty comes trying to project what your improvement's going to be sometimes. But quite often, what I've found in my experience anyway, particularly internal use cases, you can usually start quite small and cheap. It doesn't have to be, like an hourly update of a very accurate ML model. You can start looking at the trends and start doing a monthly report or whatever it might be, just to test your assumptions around the metrics.
After your time at, maybe get this right this time, Wejo?
Wejo, yeah.
Yeah, you moved on to Mobilize, which is part of the Renault Group. Before we delve deeper into your current role, what is the purpose of Mobilize and where do you sit organizationally within Renault?
Yeah, so Mobilize is one of the brands of Renault, and it was founded in 2021, really to focus on new mobility trends, sustainable travel, and different business models for Renault. We work in partnership with the bank, so Mobilize Financial Services, which allows us to, again, look at different financing and options like that. We're focused a lot on energy and the value chain within energy, but also on different types of mobility, be it subscription, be it short-term hire, and things like that. I think people's relationship with vehicles is changing. It was something we noticed first, or I noticed first during COVID. The pre-COVID, people would spend 3 hours a day in a car every single day to get to work and back, and then again at the weekends. COVID had kind of massively changed that, but I think the trend was already there. So as people's relationships with the vehicles change, and obviously we're going through an energy transition, we want to look at different ways that consumers want to engage with mobility. And that's why Mobilize was set up, to start exploring these different trends. As I said, a lot of the focus is in energy services and the energy value chain. This year we launched, I think at the end of last year, but we recently launched our first vehicle called the Mobilize Duo, which is a cool little 2-seater quadricycle, fully electric, very fun, very practical, particularly for European cities, darting in and out of traffic and things. And it looks super cool too. And within my specific area, it's all around connected services. These vehicles that are being manufactured, they've got a lot of internal compute power, a lot of sensors, and they've got the ability to continually connect to the internet, which starts to open up lots of different ways and different services within the vehicle. And, on top of that, we can get great insight from the data around safety, around parts, around how people use the vehicle, how, which features are most valuable, which features are used by certain demographics and not by others. So that's really the how Mobilize positions itself.
No, super helpful. Thanks for the overview. A lot of these areas that you work on around sustainable travel, new mobility, energy transition, hiring services, connected car services, and so on, they, I could imagine, link or are quite intertwined with loads of areas across the sort of wider Renault Group, which leads me to the question of what does your current sort of operating model look like? How do you work within Mobilize, but then also how do you work with stakeholders from across the business, as far as you can, of course, speak about that?
Yeah, it's, as you know, working in the industry, vehicle manufacturers are huge organizations with lots of different departments. We focus very much within Mobilize on, very specific use cases, owning everything from the building of the products to the go-to-market. So that gives us a very vertical slice of where we do operate. We engage with the wider organization in the same way of all the others through various, governance procedures. We're governed by Renault Group for data governance and security and things like that. Within Mobilize, we do have a level of agility that allows us to maximize some of these new use cases. So there's a little bit more autonomy than you would get. Again, one of the rationales for splitting the business, right? If you separate them out and get them to work and change the ways of working. But then, we still need the vehicle. We still need the data from the vehicle, which means we've got very, very good relationships with engineering. I've got part of the engineering team sits on my team for weekly meetings, product planning, revenue planning and things. So that gives a very, very strong tie-in with that particular department. And similarly with our software engineers and the people who are building the data platforms. It's all about regular engagement and communication. We've aligned our objectives. Our objectives are the same. We all want to succeed within, my part of the business, but across Renault generally. It's, it sounds simplistic, but communication is the key. If you're talking to your counterparts across the business, then you find issues before they become a real issue.
Do you generally distinguish between data products and digital products in your current context?
Yes, I do internally because, in my having worked in data products, I've got a very clear idea of where data products stop and the digital services start. I mean, the challenge comes that nearly every digital product will have some sort of data product driving it. If it doesn't, it should have, whether it's a website or an app or a digital service. Within those contexts, there are other teams that work on more digital services, both for internal customers and direct. Again, that all comes down to communication and collaboration. We're lucky in Renault that our car data platform, the software that takes the data from the vehicle, processes it, normalizes it, anonymizes it, privacy control, all of that is fantastically advanced and means that there's very, very little friction in terms of, being able to use the data for new use cases, which is great because it means everyone can get the benefit. So it's almost a kind of a coexistence with the digital services teams. What we both benefit from is each other's investment in the data platform. If I can get some data out to look at, I don't know, optimizing fast charge energy placement across the business, then someone else can take the same data and use it for their route planner or some other consumer-facing digital product.
Would you say that this is generally something that has changed over the past couple of, meaning sort of, especially 2 to 3, maybe 4 years in terms of the understanding of importance of building reusable, sustainable data products as opposed to sort of one-off solutions for specific use cases? Or do you think that's always been the case?
It's difficult for me because I've worked in automotive for 2 years, and I think they're not starting to, they've already, on the journey that a lot of other industries went through many years ago. Certainly, it's not new anymore to have centralized data platforms and data products. I think outside of automotive, I've seen it for years. The centralized enterprise data warehouse concept it's been around for 20 years now. And that was when centralizing your data product, data warehouse as a data product, the analytics, the data mart, the reporting, the BI suite, that's been happening for many, many years. And it's something I've always evangelized and in my early days led more of the transformation. Booking.com was the first place that I saw the real benefits and not just the benefits, but really what could be achieved by this centralized data product model. Some of them, the basic models, we call them basic, they were uber sophisticated, but there were the base models around, who was the customer? Were they business or leisure? Were they a family? Was the user price sensitive or location sensitive or quality sensitive? And the move that the centralization that they had around those core models allowed every other product team to focus on the very, very key part of their business. So, an example, we were, my team looking at if someone was purchasing a hotel, were they more likely to want a taxi transfer from the airport to the hotel or hire a car? And, if you've already got the model built that gives you a high prediction if they're a business traveler or a family, a lot of the work's done for you, and you can then just focus on the very specific model on the model that takes one of their models as the input to get the right prediction. So I think it's been around for a long time, and automotive are catching up.
You mentioned it earlier in our conversation that one of the benefits of working in an internal team is that you can work very closely with different functions and that you can also experiment quite a lot and learn fast and get quick access to relevant data sources and really understand how the different teams work today, which leads me to a question around prioritization. So how do you, usually there is a surplus of demand. There are always more problems to solve than you could tackle generally. How do you prioritize your different initiatives, and how do you try to balance this element of ambidexterity of sort of shorter term tactical solutions with longer term strategic solutions in your space?
Yeah, it's the age-old challenge of product development. As you said, there's always more demand than supply. We've implemented Safe Agile within Renault, and we've got quite a quite a mature process now in that space, particularly when it comes to software development and that side. So that allows us to kind of operate within my team a little bit more, fast paced in terms of speaking to customers, finding out their specific use case, but also have the certainty around the planning and the prioritization. And that 3-month cycle that we use there gives us the opportunity to work with the other stakeholders who are also demand on that team and make sure we're all aligned in terms of for that particular development cycle, whose is the top priority, where can we make concessions, and where can we, do the usual horse trading around what we're going to commit to and what we're not going to commit to but may get to at the end, and things like that. And that's where we make the call of tactical versus strategic. I think there's a slight difference in building the data product for the commercial world, in that unless you've got a very good relationship with the customer and they're willing to have an element of risk, if they're using your data product to build a commercial offering, they need a little bit more certainty that the data product is stable, is production quality, gives them the level of data and the size of data that they need to build their external products. So in those sort of in that sort of relationship, we don't work quite as agile as if it was an internal consumer who's got a little bit more try and fail approach. So for that, there's certainty around slightly longer development cycles, but more certainty over the quality and the production level is a benefit for us.
No, super helpful. Just in case anyone isn't familiar, SAFe, I guess, is sort of a specific framework and methodology to implement agile at scale for large organizations. That's quite modular, isn't it?
Yes. It is, yeah. I mean, I've worked in many different implementations of agile, with a small a, with a big A, that follow different frameworks and things like that. And with anything, I mean, the whole agile methodology is, well, create value that works within your organization.
Yeah.
And, I think I won't get into the debate around SAFe agile versus Scrum versus whatever, and if they are actually really agile. But having said that, I think software development needs iteration. I think it's also has always had challenges around, planning and estimation and things like that. So within an organization the size of Renault, particularly when you're interacting with parts of the business that, it's just not feasible to work in an agile way. You can't build a factory using try and fail methods. If you've got a planning cycle to release a vehicle and you've got certain quality touch points and things like that, it's not as feasible to do this, uber agile, 1 week sprint, 2 week sprint, revisit, and so on and so forth. So in those sort of organizations, you really need a process that allows the longer term waterfall planning cycles, predictability, versus the iterative approach that you have in software development. And SAFe Agile works. I'm sure there's other organizations that use different versions. And I'm sure there's lots of people who say that SAFe Agile is a contradiction in terms, but that's the world we live in.
I mean, lots of, especially in the automotive industry, I know at least of a few other manufacturers that follow SAFe quite somewhat successfully.
Yeah.
Building on, speaking of processes and ways of working and tools more widely, using segue to GenAI. What role does GenAI currently play for you, both from a digital product development process standpoint, so using this as a tool to make your delivery more efficient and effective, but then also on the flip side, as a product that you develop, offer within Renault, but then also outside today, and then maybe we can talk about the possible future. We have a crystal ball about possible future afterwards.
Yeah, I mean the speed of the development of GenAI and how we're all able to very quickly see, wow, like what it can do, but also what where the limits are, has opened up a bit of a gold rush for use cases. It's no different at Renault. We've got company-wide initiatives to look at where AI specifically, AI generally, but GenAI specifically, can further optimize what we're doing. Where we've been using AI back when it was called machine learning or data science for years, as with any organization, particularly, manufacturing. The Renault manufacturing data ecosystem is very advanced for planning, for anomaly detection, and things. So we've already got like the ecosystem to start plugging in the Gen AI. I think for the way that particularly agent models are able to kind of interact, there's two elements. This is generally not specifically about Renault, but there's the additional automation that agent-based architectures can start to give you. Then on the other side, there's the efficiencies of particularly people-facing roles, and they're the two that are commonly being looked at. And again, there's initiatives within Renault looking at all of those. We are, there's programs to look at how consumers interact with their vehicle. That's one thing that AI is going to really change, is how you can talk to what is effectively a machine or a computer and get instructions back and forward and information back and forward. A specific case that we're working on within my remit, which I think is going to be a very, very big change in how people interact with data, is using it for, again, agent-based in terms of natural language processing for querying complicated data stores. I've been working with Power BI, Tableau, Looker for, again, many, many years, and they've always tried this, natural language querying, and it was always great in demo, but it never really went much past the sales pitch. Sorry, Tableau, Looker, and so on and so forth. You've got great products, but we all know it never quite hit that. Two challenges I always think with that. One was you need to classify the data. If the data's not labeled, then a machine can't read it. When you're writing a SQL query, the column names and the data attributes. When you're speaking, you don't know the shorthand, or you don't know all of the weird and wonderful things that database developers label the data with. And then similarly at the business end, we've all worked with data where there's huge amounts of variation in people's names or department names and whatever it might be. So what generative AI and other forms of ML are going to allow us to do is much faster classify and interpret that data. And then there's the other element, is allowing people to interact with it in a much more intuitive way. It's much easier to talk to a machine than to try and write SQL queries. We've got an initiative where we're using the data products that my team are developing, specifically in the geospatial element, which is data on a map, and looking at charge station plates based on driving behavior, traffic behavior, what other vehicles are around. The interface to interrogate maps is very, very difficult in a point and click. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but you've got to deal with nearest neighbor, pointing polygon, all of those really complicated things, and where the road is and all of those things. And it's actually quite difficult to draw your query on a map, even with a user interface. And then it takes an extra level of skill to be able to write geospatial queries and manage the different data sources and map them together. What agent-based AI is allowing us to do is to type or speak those queries. So can you tell me can you identify on the map all the data points where, all the locations where it's more than 3 kilometers from a road that has got more than 20,000 vehicles in a week? And then the agent can go off and interpret your voice, interpret the data within there, build the SQL query, run it, look at the results, and then feed them back to you, and even draw the map for you. So that's one use case that we're using, and is starting to have really, really excellent results. Again, because what it's doing is it's taking away some very complicated technical concepts and, letting the agent do that for you.
You mentioned a few use cases there that you use both for your own work, but then also as products that you deliver. If we look ahead, let's say 3 to 5 years, I don't think it makes sense to look much further than that, given the uncertainty and volatility. How do you think the nature of GenAI use cases will change? Do you think it will more be that we've essentially seen what the future could hold, and it's more about stabilizing, productionizing, and scaling these use cases to a sustainable, robust level globally? Or do you think we will see an increase in pace as it relates to the applications also in terms of end customer facing solutions, speaking of sort of omni-channel agents that are highly personalized and things like that that we sort of could think of?
Yeah, the gold rush that I mentioned before is very much, and not just in Renault, but other organizations, is very much around, right, okay, we know what the expensive cost bases are. We've already got a level of automation. Nearly always there's a level of automation, and that is then further improved by GenAI, whether it's custom queries or creating specific content for people. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, people will find the sweet spot of where that is worth investing in. It's not always worth optimizing, particularly the expense of some of these models, but that's where we'll see the continual improvement. What I'm starting to see, which is very quick, is changing the way that people interact with the technology and the machines. One example I saw very recently was outside of Renault, a consultancy company who, their bread and butter was speaking to people, finding out across the organization what the trends were. They've set up an AI to do that for them. So instead of being able to, interview 5-10 people over the course of 2 weeks in a slot that, you could just about find on a computer and making notes and turning that into insight, you can give them a link to this model and they can talk to it on the way home. They can talk to it on the lunch break or when they've got 20 minutes spare. It's more than just data collection then. It's a conversation with the computer, which can then react to the comments and other prompts and actually gain more and more insight. And all of a sudden, they're not just interviewing 5 people, they're interviewing 50, 500. AI then summarizes that. And then they can use their real expertise, which isn't, holding interviews. It's interpreting the data and the trends and the results, and then able to produce better insight on that company because they've been able to very quickly collate more data, more insights. And that's just one example. And I think that for me is where I'm starting to see the real disruption is, how we're talking and to computers and how those computers are understanding what we've said and then feeding it back.
As a last question from my side, just building on that point, imagine that you're speaking to a chief data and AI officer at one of the incumbent automotive manufacturers. What would be your top 3 recommendations to him or her to unlock the most possible value from these GenAI use cases that we've spoken about or beyond in a sustainable way?
I mean, the first thing is if they've got a chief data and AI officer, they're that's a good place to be, right? It shows that they're dealing with it strategically, and that's what it always comes down to. If the culture and the change, the disruptive change is always top down. Culture is a top down concept, and if you can start building the top down understanding and education of what AI is and what it isn't, invest in the centralized data sets. You don't want the cost or the inconvenience or the governance challenges with having 5 to 10 AI models that are all effectively doing the same thing. But that's technology leadership as much as anything. But after that, really focus on, again, what are the decisions? What are the use cases where you can get maximum value? Nearly always in data and technology, you get more value from going from 0 to something than something to something better. So find out what those early use cases are. Try some of the smaller implementations if you're able to. Find out what that value is, and then start to scale where the value is. And I think that we'll see so many of these implementations over the next 5 to 10 years that people are going to come with their own ideas. Similarly, as we saw, as people's relationship with data and insight changed, people suddenly said, "I now want data. I need data to do my job." As people get more used to what this new technology can deliver, they'll start coming to you. So just make sure you're open to those ideas and able to listen and able to create the ecosystem and the technology that people can very, very quickly test and gain value from this technology.
Now, thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate you making time for this today. Super, super insightful conversation.
Great to talk to you. Yeah, thank you.